Hello everyone, I am Vanished Signal. And before we start with some new stories, like and subscribe to the channel. Also comment down below from where you are watching this. The girl in the mirror. When I first moved into the apartment, I wasn't expecting much. Just something cheap, quiet, and far from the wreckage of my last relationship. The building was older than I'd hoped, with a lingering scent of mildew and long hallways that seemed to absorb light instead of reflect it. My unit was at the end of the third floor, with only one neighbor, a reclusive old man who never spoke a word to me. The landlord mumbled something about being the only vacancy in months, but I didn't care. I was desperate to escape the noise of the world. The first thing I noticed when I stepped inside was the mirror. It stood alone in the hallway near the bedroom, nearly as tall as me and twice as wide. Its wooden frame was old, dark, and carved with swirling, thorny vines that wrapped around each corner like claws. There was a faint crack across the top corner of the glass, but otherwise, it was in perfect condition. I assumed it had been left behind by the last tenant, and made a mental note to ask the landlord if I should store it in the basement. The first few days passed without incident. I unpacked, started a new job at the bookstore down the street, and tried to settle into the silence. At night, I could hear the pipes creak and the radiator hiss. But otherwise, the apartment was quiet. Eerily so. It was on the third night that I noticed something strange about the mirror. I was brushing my teeth when I caught sight of movement in the hallway. I turned, expecting to see my reflection, but the mirror was empty. My reflection hadn't arrived yet. I stared, confused, for a second too long, and then the reflection slid into view, as if it had been running to catch up. I blinked and rubbed my eyes. I must have been more tired than I thought. But even then, something in my stomach turned over. There was something off about the reflection. The angle of the head tilt, the way the eyes seemed to lock with mine just a second too long, like it was waiting for me to notice the delay. I laughed nervously, turned off the bathroom light, and went to bed, convincing myself it was just stress playing tricks. The next morning, I didn't remember the mirror incident until I walked past it again. This time, I moved slowly, keeping my eyes on the glass. My reflection followed perfectly. No lag, no strange movements. I stood in front of it for a full minute. Nothing happened. I even waved. I felt ridiculous, but more relieved than I wanted to admit. That was until I turned to walk away. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the reflection blink, but I hadn't. I spun back around, but the reflection stood exactly as I did, matching my stance, my breathing, my terrified stare. That day at work, I couldn't focus. I kept thinking about the mirror, about the delay, the extra blink, the weird way it made the hallway seem colder than the rest of the apartment. When I mentioned it offhand to my coworker Melissa, she laughed it off and said maybe it was haunted. "Those old buildings always come with ghosts," she joked. I forced a laugh, but it didn't help. That night, I decided to cover the mirror. I didn't want to throw it out, not yet. But I figured if I didn't see it, it wouldn't bother me. I found an old sheet in the closet and draped it over the frame, tucking the edges around the sides to keep it from slipping. It looked silly, like I was trying to hide a body. But it gave me enough peace of mind to sleep, at least for a while. Around 2:17 a.m., I woke up to a soft thud. Not loud, not sharp, just the kind of sound that makes your brain say something isn't where it's supposed to be. I got out of bed and peeked into the hallway. The sheet was on the floor, pooled around the mirror like it had been yanked off. My reflection was standing in the frame. Only I wasn't. I stood frozen in the dark hallway, staring at the mirror where another version of me was smiling. A crooked, unnatural smile that stretched too far and didn't reach the eyes. My reflection raised its hand and waved, even though I hadn't moved. Then, slowly, it turned around and walked away, disappearing into the back of the mirror, like the hallway continued forever behind it. I backed away, heart racing, until I hit the wall of the bedroom. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. When the sun rose, the mirror showed nothing but my pale, exhausted reflection. No smile, no second movements, just me. I called the landlord that morning and asked about the mirror. He sounded confused. "What mirror?" he asked. "There's no mirror in that unit. I've been meaning to replace one in 4C, but not yours," I insisted. He swore he didn't know what I was talking about. When I hung up, I took a hammer and tried to smash the mirror. I hit it 3 times before I realized it wasn't cracking. The wood shuddered under the impact, but the glass didn't even ripple. Not a scratch. I covered it again, this time with a thick blanket, and nailed the corners to the wall to hold it in place. Then I left the apartment. I didn't care where I went. I just couldn't be there. I walked for hours, getting lost in the streets, trying to come up with a plan. Could I move again? Break my lease? Burn the place down? Eventually, I made my way back, just as the sun was starting to set. I climbed the stairs slowly, heart pounding. When I reached the hallway, I stopped. My door was open, and something was waiting just inside. A shadow moved past the doorway. I crept forward inch by inch, pushing the door open with my foot. The apartment was cold, much colder than before. The lights didn't work. I stepped inside and froze. The mirror was uncovered again. This time, there were 2 reflections. Both of them were me. One was staring at me with dead, blank eyes. The other was grinning, showing teeth. And neither one moved when I did. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at the twin reflections, both mine, but horribly wrong. One stared through me, eyes dull like clouded glass, and the other grinned wider than any human mouth should be able to. My own body refused to move. I felt like a marionette with its strings cut, limbs heavy with fear. My breath came in short, ragged gasps, the air suddenly thick, as though the mirror itself was pressing down on my chest. Then, slowly, the grinning reflection raised its hand and placed it against the inside of the mirror. Not like a mirror image, opposite of me. It was like it had its own mind, its own intent, and it wanted me to know. Behind it, I could see something else. Shapes moving in the darkness beyond the mirror's surface. The hallway I had seen earlier inside the reflection stretched on forever, dimly lit by flickering yellow lights. It wasn't a reflection at all. It was a tunnel, a place, a prison. My own reflection, the blank one, turned its head slightly, as if listening to something. And then, with perfect synchronization, both versions of me began to speak. Their mouths moved at the same time, but no sound came out. I only saw the shape of the words, and it chilled me more than if they had screamed, "Let us in?" I ran. I didn't think. I didn't grab my phone, my keys, anything. I just turned and bolted out of the apartment, slamming the door behind me, my heartbeat thudding in my ears. I didn't stop running until I was outside on the street, leaning against a light pole, dry heaving from the panic. People passed by me, uncaring. To them, I was just another unstable person on the street. But I knew what I saw. That wasn't stress. That wasn't lack of sleep. That was real. And it wanted something. I crashed on a friend's couch that night. I didn't tell her the whole truth, just said something weird was going on in my place. Maybe someone had broken in. She offered to go back with me the next morning, but I made up an excuse. I needed to see it alone. I needed to confirm it hadn't followed me. Deep down, I already knew it had. I went back the next afternoon. Bright daylight poured through the hallway windows as I unlocked the door. The apartment was still, too still, like it was waiting. I stepped inside cautiously. The mirror was covered again, perfectly. The blanket was nailed down just like I had left it. No sign that anyone, or anything, had been there. I checked every room. Nothing out of place, nothing broken, no twin reflections, just me, just silence. It almost felt normal, almost. I left again. I didn't trust it. But I kept thinking about what I saw, about the hallway inside the mirror, the shadows moving in the distance, and those reflections, what they said. Let us in, not let me out. They weren't trapped, they were waiting, and I was the one with the door. That night, I had the first dream. I was back in the hallway inside the mirror. It was longer this time, stretching on endlessly, the lights overhead buzzing, flickering. My footsteps echoed too loud against the stone floor. I saw doors on either side, all shut, all identical, except one. It was slightly ajar, just enough to see a sliver of movement beyond it. I didn't want to go near it, but I couldn't stop my body from walking toward it. Inside, I saw myself, sitting in a chair, facing the wall. But my skin was wrong, too smooth, too pale like wax. I called out to her, to me, but the figure didn't move. It just sat there motionless, a marionette waiting for strings. Then it slowly turned its head. It didn't have eyes, just hollow, gaping holes where they should be. Its mouth opened in a silent scream, and I woke up soaked in sweat. I didn't sleep the next night, or the one after. I started seeing my reflection move out of sync again, even in other mirrors. The bathroom, my phone screen, shop windows, always a split-second delay, always that sickening feeling that something else was looking through me. I tried getting rid of the mirror. I called a junk removal service, told them to take it, I didn't care where. The guy came in, took one look at it, and said, "You sure?" I nodded, probably too fast. He shrugged and wheeled it out. I watched from the window as they loaded it into the truck and drove off. I thought that was it. I thought I was safe. But 2 nights later, it was back. I came home from work to find it standing in the hallway again. No blanket. No scratches on the floor to suggest it had been dragged. It was just there. Pristine, perfect. Humming softly with an energy that made my teeth ache. I screamed. I screamed until my voice cracked. I punched the glass, kicked the wood. Nothing. It wouldn't budge. I called the police, told them someone had broken in and moved furniture into my apartment. They found no sign of forced entry, no prints, and definitely no proof of a second mirror having been delivered. They told me to get some rest and handed me a card for a crisis counselor on their way out. I haven't been able to leave since. The hallway inside the mirror is getting brighter. I see figures walking in it now. Sometimes they wear my face. Sometimes they wear other faces I don't recognize. But they're getting closer. Every night, I dream of the door in that hallway, the one that's slightly ajar. And every night, it opens a little more. I think I know what happens when it opens fully. I think I'm not going to be the one standing in front of the mirror anymore. And when that happens, when my reflection finally steps through, I don't think it's going to stop at just replacing me. The room that wasn't on the blueprints. When Emily and Josh bought the old Victorian on the edge of the woods, they thought they were buying peace. The city had worn them thin, sirens at night, neighbors above and below, elevators that never worked. So when their offer was accepted on a house that felt like it had slipped from a dream, they packed everything into a U-Haul, and left the noise behind. The place was weather-beaten and sun-faded, but it had a soul. The banister was hand-carved. The attic was wide and high. There was a wraparound porch where you could see stars at night, actual stars, not just the glow of a plane flying overhead. It was the kind of place that whispered stories when the wind moved through it. The house was built in 1894. The last owner, a man in his 80s, had passed away suddenly and had no family to inherit it. The place had sat empty for nearly a year before being listed. When they first walked through it, they felt that same magic people talk about on those renovation shows, the just right feeling. Emily took one look at the sunroom and called it her future writing nook. Josh tapped on the old plaster walls and imagined the open-concept kitchen he'd always wanted. It was far from perfect, but they were young and in love, and thought hard work could fix anything. The realtor handed them the blueprints during closing. 2 floors, 3 bedrooms, 1.5 baths. Nothing unusual. But from the first night, strange things happened. It was never anything huge, just small things that felt a little too coincidental. The bedroom door swung shut on its own. Light bulbs flickered. Josh's tools weren't where he'd left them. Sometimes the thermostat would drop 10 degrees without anyone touching it. Emily wrote it all off to the quirks of an old house. Josh blamed the wiring. They laughed about it until the laundry room. There was something odd about the way the air moved down there. Josh noticed it first. Every time he passed by the washer, the hairs on his arms would lift. The draft didn't feel like air conditioning or a crack in the foundation. It was still, cold, too still, as if the air wasn't moving because of ventilation, but because something was breathing. He mentioned it to Emily. She laughed and told him to stop scaring himself. "It's a haunted dryer," she joked. But she started avoiding going downstairs when he wasn't home. Then came the hammer. Josh was working on replacing old drywall behind the washer. The wall had water damage, probably from a leaky pipe that had since been patched. The surface came off easily, but when he hit a deeper layer behind it, older, denser, his hammer bounced with a dull thud. That shouldn't have been there. The wall was supposed to be hollow behind the plumbing, but instead it gave resistance. He dug deeper, pulling off chunks of plaster until he exposed something unnatural. The edge of a door frame. Sealed off. No knob. Just wood. Rotted in parts, wedged tight in a space that didn't make sense. It was flush with the wall on all sides, like someone had gone through the trouble of hiding it completely. The blueprints hadn't mentioned any extra room. He checked 3 times. For a long while, he didn't tell Emily. At night, he'd lie awake listening to the sounds coming from beneath their bedroom. The walls creaked, sure, but there was more. A sound like wood dragging against wood. A faint click, sometimes rhythmic, like something tapping on hollow stone. And then there were the dreams. Josh started having the same one every night. Standing in a room with no windows, no lights, just that carved symbol on the wall, and the overwhelming sense that something was behind him, watching. In the dream, he'd never turn around. Finally, he showed Emily. She followed him down the creaking stairs to the laundry room, eyes narrowing when she saw the plastic sheet pinned over the area behind the washer. He peeled it away slowly, like unveiling something dead. There it was, the hidden door. Only now, it was open, just an inch. They both froze. Neither of them had touched it since Josh found it. The room beyond was pitch black. Not the kind of black where the light hasn't reached yet, but the kind that feels like it's swallowing the space around it. The air pouring from it was damp and cold, like the breath of something ancient. Emily flicked the laundry room light, but the bulb above them popped instantly, throwing them into near darkness. Josh turned on his phone flashlight and pointed it toward the crack in the doorway. Inside, there was just more blackness. The beam of light didn't seem to land on anything. "Don't," Josh said as Emily leaned forward. "Just don't." She pulled back, sensing the change in his tone. He was pale, sweating. "Let's close it," he muttered. "We'll call someone tomorrow. Just not tonight." That night, the house felt different. Every floorboard groaned louder. The cold had spread past the laundry room. Their bedroom, once cozy and warm, now felt brittle. They said nothing. Josh barely touched his dinner. Emily kept glancing at her phone, though she didn't know why. At 3:08 a.m., Josh sat up in bed. His body knew something before his mind did. There was movement in the house. Not above, not beside, but beneath them. He slid out of bed, careful not to wake Emily. He grabbed his flashlight from the nightstand, walked softly down the hallway, and descended the stairs. When he reached the laundry room, the door was open all the way. The flashlight flickered, but Josh pressed forward, the beam landing inside the room that shouldn't exist. What he saw made his mouth go dry. The room was circular, stone-lined, like a chamber buried deep beneath the house. No drywall, no wood paneling, just cold, ancient stone. In the center of the floor was a wooden chair, simple, child-sized, facing the far wall. On that wall, carved deep into the stone, was a symbol, 2 overlapping circles surrounded by jagged teeth. Josh didn't recognize it, but it made his stomach twist. Above the symbol, nailed into the stone, was a single object, a small, red canvas shoe. It was old, moldy, the kind you'd find on a toddler. And below it, scratched into the floor in uneven letters, was a message. "Let them in." Josh backed out of the room slowly. He didn't run. He didn't scream. He just stepped backward until he reached the laundry room again and shut the door. But when his hand touched the frame, he felt something strange. Heat. The door was cold moments ago, but now it radiated warmth. He pressed his ear to the wood. Silence. He locked the laundry room behind him, climbed the stairs without a word, and crawled back into bed next to Emily. His heart wouldn't stop racing. In the morning, Emily found him sitting on the porch, a blanket wrapped around his shoulders. She asked what happened. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Later that day, she went down to see the door again for herself. There was no door, no seam, no gap, just a blank wall, patched perfectly, as if it had never been touched. The door was gone, not sealed, not hidden behind drywall or cleverly disguised with paint. Gone, as if it had never existed. Where the doorway to the hidden basement room had once been, there was now only smooth, unbroken wall. The light gray paint looked freshly dried, untouched, even though they had just discovered that space less than 24 hours ago. Emily stood in front of it, blinking, refusing to believe her eyes. She ran her hand along the surface, half expecting her fingers to slip through some kind of illusion, but it was solid. Cool to the touch, not the least bit suspicious. Still, the washer sat pushed aside, the floor still dusty where Josh had dragged it out of the way. It was real. She knew it had been real. She remembered the draft of cold air, the heavy silence in that hidden room, the way it had felt like stepping inside a sealed tomb. Now, it was as if the house had changed its mind. It had let them in once, and now it was covering its tracks. She didn't tell Josh right away. Since the previous night, he hadn't been quite the same. After finding that chair in the basement, the small wooden one with the initials MW etched into the backrest, He had grown withdrawn, quiet, in a way that wasn't just tired or shaken. He sat on the porch most of the afternoon, staring toward the trees, not even pretending to read the old blueprints anymore. When Emily tried to ask him about what he thought the room had been, he just muttered something about layers and rotting walls, but nothing coherent. That night, Emily had a dream that made her bolt upright in bed. She was back inside the hidden room. It was darker this time, no visible light source, but she could still see. The walls were stone now, not concrete, and slick with something wet. Hundreds of tiny red shoes were nailed to the walls, their soles all pointed inward toward the center, where that same small chair sat in silence. A pale child sat in the chair, legs dangling, unmoving. It turned its head toward her with a slow, grinding motion. Its face didn't look quite human. There were no eyelids, and the skin seemed to ripple slightly, as if it weren't attached to any bone. It smiled, and she saw rows of pointed teeth like the edge of a circular saw. Then it spoke. Not aloud, but directly into her mind. "You opened the room. Now we can see. Now we remember." Emily woke up gasping, heart hammering, throat tight. She reached for Josh instinctively, but the bed beside her was empty. The air was cold, colder than it should have been. She wrapped herself in a sweater and padded down the stairs, half expecting to find him in the kitchen, maybe fixing tea, trying to shake the same sense of unease. But the kitchen was dark. No sign of him in the living room either. Then she heard it, the soft creaking of footsteps from above. Her stomach turned. The attic. She climbed the stairs slowly, her feet dragging as if they were resisting the decision. At the top, the pull-string light was on, casting flickering shadows into the narrow space. Josh stood at the far end, staring at the wall, his back to her. He was holding something in his hands, what looked like a sheet of paper. She crept forward and saw it was the blueprint. Not a copy. The blueprint, the original one he had found, smudged with fingerprints and folded at the corners. Except now, there was something different. A red shape had been drawn in where the hidden room had been. But the shape wasn't rectangular. It was a circle. And inside the circle, 3 words were scrawled in jagged handwriting. "It breathes now." Emily whispered his name. Josh turned slowly, and she saw something hollow in his expression. Not fear, acceptance, or maybe exhaustion. "It's not just a room," he said quietly. "It's alive." From that point forward, the house changed. That night, the temperature dropped so drastically that their breath fogged in the living room. The radiator clicked uselessly. The thermostat blinked and died. They bundled in blankets, trying to pretend everything was fine, that maybe the furnace just gave out. But then came the sound. At first, it was just a low hum, electrical, like bad wiring. Then came the tapping. Not from the floorboards this time, but from inside the walls. A light scratching, then silence. Then again. Rhythmic, intentional. Josh tore open a vent in the hallway, flashlight clenched between his teeth. There were no mice, no signs of infestation. But when he pressed his ear to the wall near the stairs, he heard something that made his blood run cold. A whisper, faint but deliberate. He couldn't understand the words, but it was speaking to him, and not from the other side of the wall, from inside it. Just after 2 in the morning, every light in the house shut off at once. The power didn't flicker, it stopped. Total blackout. Emily screamed as the windows turned pitch black. Not the black of night, but something deeper, as if the glass had been painted from the outside. Then, from below their feet, a single word rose up, carried not by volume, but by force. Closer! Josh grabbed his keys and pulled Emily into the car. We're leaving, he muttered. We can't stay here another second. They slammed the car doors and turned the key. The engine turned over, sputtered, then died. The dashboard flickered. On the third try, the stereo blared to life. Not music, not static. A voice. Josh's voice. I found the room, it said. It's not empty. I don't know how long it's been feeding, but it's waking up. Emily stared at him, wide-eyed. You recorded that? Josh shook his head. Number, I never said that out loud. Emily reached for her phone, trying to call for help, but every bar was gone. No service, no Wi-Fi. It was like the house had swallowed them completely, cut off every lifeline. They made a plan to walk to the nearest neighbor, 3/4 of a mile down the road. But when they stepped outside, the world had changed. The road was gone. In its place was more forest, the same trees, the same grass. But the layout was wrong. The stars overhead were wrong too, shifted somehow. No Big Dipper, no North Star. The moon was a pale, trembling smear behind oily clouds. And worst of all, the house was watching. Emily turned back to look at it. The front door was open, wide open, and the small wooden chair from the basement now sat in the middle of the porch. Empty. She started to run, but Josh didn't move. He was staring at the chair like it was speaking directly to him. It wants something, he said. That's why it let us find the room. It's not just haunted, it's hungry. That night, they didn't sleep. They stayed locked inside the car, eyes darting between the house and the woods, as if anything could emerge from either direction. The porch light stayed on the entire time. But the next morning, when they awoke stiff and cold, something had changed again. The house was closer. The front steps were inches from their bumper, like the entire foundation had slid forward while they slept. The chair was gone. The front door was still wide open. And on the living room wall, in dripping black letters, a new message had appeared. You are inside now. The girl in the water. It started the week after I moved into the cottage by the lake. A quiet little place tucked deep in the woods with barely a neighbor in sight. It was exactly what I'd been looking for. Seclusion, peace, and space to think after a bitter divorce and a job that had sucked every ounce of joy out of me. The air smelled cleaner, the nights were darker, and the world felt miles away, like I had finally put enough distance between myself and everything I needed to forget. For the first few days, things were exactly as I imagined. Long walks in the pine-covered trails, the occasional glimpse of a deer at dusk, coffee on the porch every morning while the fog drifted across the lake like a ghost that had forgotten it was dead. But then came the girl. The first time I saw her, it was just a blur. Something pale standing knee-deep in the water at the edge of the reeds. I was halfway through my coffee and almost mistook her for a swan until she turned her head. Just slightly. Just enough for me to realize it wasn't a bird at all. It was a child. A girl, maybe 10 years old, in a long white dress that clung to her skin like it had been soaked through. She didn't wave or speak. She didn't even move. Just stood there, staring at nothing, until the fog thickened and swallowed her from sight. I didn't think much of it then. Maybe a local kid out playing early. Maybe she'd wandered off from one of the houses down the shoreline. But when I asked around in town later that week, the people at the diner got quiet real fast. A waitress named Carol finally broke the silence and said, "You don't go near the water after dark. And if you see her again, you pretend you didn't." I laughed like she was kidding, but she wasn't. She stared me down like I'd just said something dangerous out loud. That was the first time I considered leaving. The second was 3 nights later when I woke to the sound of water dripping in the hallway. At first, I thought it was the roof, maybe a leak. But when I got up to check, I found footprints, small, wet ones, leading from the back door to the foot of my bed. They weren't there when I went to sleep. They didn't lead back out. I barely slept that night. The next morning, I found lakeweed tangled around the doorknob and tiny fingernail scratches etched into the wood frame like someone had clawed at it trying to get in or trying to get out. That night, I locked every window, bolted the doors, and left the lights on. But it didn't help. Around 2 a.m., I heard soft splashing outside. When I looked through the window, I saw her again, closer this time, standing just at the edge of the dock with her head tilted upward like she was listening to something above her. Her hair hung down like ropes of shadow. I couldn't move. I couldn't blink. I watched as she raised one hand and pointed at the house, at me, and then she was gone. No sound, no footsteps, just mist and silence and the distant hoot of an owl that felt wrong somehow, too sharp, too human in pitch. I tried telling myself I was dreaming, that stress was playing tricks on me. But every night it got worse. The dripping, the footprints, the scratches. And then she came inside. I never saw her walk through the door, never heard the lock turn. One second I was staring at the empty hallway, and the next she was standing there, soaked dress dripping on the wood, eyes like wet obsidian, lips parted in a whisper I couldn't quite hear. The air turned freezing. My breath fogged. I tried to speak, but no words came. Just fear, primal and suffocating. She stepped closer and held something out. A necklace, tarnished silver with a cracked heart pendant. I didn't recognize it, but the second I touched it, my vision changed. I saw a hand, large, rough, shoving her underwater. Her arms flailed. Her mouth opened in a scream that never left her throat. I felt her panic, her lungs filling, her final thoughts not of escape but of betrayal. When I came to, I was lying on the floor, drenched in lake water with a necklace in my hand. The girl was gone. I did research the next day, digging through local archives and asking questions I probably shouldn't have. The story was buried, but I found pieces. A girl named Angela had drowned in that lake 40 years ago. They said it was an accident. She'd wandered off, slipped on the dock, fell in. But Carol at the diner told me the truth. Her father did it. Pushed her, held her under. No one believed the mother. They called her hysterical, said she'd gone mad with grief. She disappeared soon after. Some said she walked into the lake herself. Others said she just left town. But Angela stayed. She never left. And now she was asking me for something I didn't understand. That night, she came back. Not to scare me, to lead me. She pointed toward the woods behind the house and vanished. I followed the next morning and found the well, covered in leaves, half buried under roots. Inside I found bones, a child's, and beside them, the same necklace she had given me. I called the sheriff anonymously. They dug it up, labeled it a cold case. No arrests, no answers, just closure. But Angela hasn't come back, not yet. The dripping stopped, the scratching, the wet footprints. It's quiet now. But sometimes, when the fog rolls heavy across the lake and the wind turns sharp, I hear a girl's laughter echo across the water. Soft, distant, grateful. I think she's finally at peace, but I also think she's watching, making sure I never forget. The eyes in apartment 302. When I first moved into the Hollow Pines apartment complex, I was just happy to have a roof over my head. It wasn't fancy, and the hallway always smelled like stale bleach and dust. But the rent was cheap. and I didn't have the luxury of being picky. I'd just gone through a rough breakup, lost a job I thought I'd keep for years, and found myself one missed paycheck away from sleeping in my car. Hollow Pines, despite its chipped paint and creaky floorboards, was a second chance. My new apartment, number 306, was nothing special. One bedroom, a kitchen the size of a broom closet, and windows that rattled when the wind blew hard. But it was quiet. That's what I liked most. No loud neighbors, no barking dogs, just the steady hum of city noise outside and the occasional clink of a heater that had seen better decades. The only thing that ever really stood out to me was apartment 302. It sat directly across from mine, and I never saw anyone go in or out. The lights were always off, blinds always drawn, door always shut. For the first week, I assumed it was vacant. Then, late one night, I caught movement through the peephole. I'd heard a soft scraping noise, like something being dragged slowly across the carpet. And out of curiosity, I looked through the peephole expecting to see a janitor or maybe someone moving in. But there was nothing. Just the door to 302. I was about to turn away when I noticed something in the corner of my vision. Two pale, wide eyes staring directly at me from behind the narrow slit of the apartment door. They didn't blink. They didn't move. They just stared. I backed away, my heart thudding, convinced I was seeing things. Maybe a trick of the light, maybe exhaustion. But the next morning, something was slid under my door. A photo. It was grainy, black and white, and clearly old, like it had been photocopied 100 times. But it was unmistakably my apartment. Apartment 306. And in the photo, standing just inside my doorway, was a figure with large, empty eyes. The same eyes I had seen through the peephole. I didn't sleep that night. I checked every lock, every window. I stuffed towels under the door and sat with a knife in my lap until the sun rose. But nothing happened. No sounds. No movement from 302. It was as if the building itself had fallen asleep. I decided to ask the landlord about it. When I brought up apartment 302, his face changed immediately. He grew pale and said, "We don't talk about that unit." I pressed him, told him I saw someone there, that someone had slipped a photo under my door. He shook his head. "No one's lived there in over 10 years, he said. Not since the woman disappeared." He didn't elaborate, just handed me his card and told me to call if anything else strange happened. That night, I dreamed of eyes. Hundreds of them, all floating in the air around my bed, watching, blinking in unison, and whispering things I couldn't quite make out. I woke up drenched in sweat with a distinct feeling that someone had been standing in my bedroom. And when I looked at the wall across from me, I saw it again. Another photo. This time pinned to the wall with a rusty nail. It was the hallway, viewed from the inside of apartment 302, and I was in the photo, peering through my own peephole. The angle was impossible. There's no way anyone could have taken that photo unless they were inside 302 and watching me through the cracks. I tried to leave. I packed a bag and made it to the front door, but it wouldn't open. The lock turned, the knob twisted, but the door wouldn't budge, as if something on the other side was holding it shut. I screamed. I pounded on the wood. I called the landlord, but the call never went through. No signal, no power, just silence. And then the scraping started again. Software slow, getting closer. I looked through the peephole and saw the hallway stretching endlessly, darker than before, warped like the walls were closing in. And standing in the center was a figure, tall and thin, with eyes that seemed to glow faintly in the dark. They didn't move. They just stared. And then, without warning, my lights went out. Total darkness. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen, listening to the scrape of bare feet on cheap carpet inch closer and closer. I felt breath on my neck. I turned. Nothing. But when the lights flickered back on, I wasn't in my apartment anymore. I was in 302. The room was exactly like mine, but wrong. The walls pulsed, like they were breathing. The air was thick, heavy with rot and decay. And the photos, they covered every surface. Hundreds of them. All of me. Sleeping, eating, crying, staring into the mirror. There were pictures I never took. Pictures no one should have been able to take. I ran for the door, but it wouldn't open. I screamed again. And then I heard a whisper. Software right behind me. You shouldn't have looked. When I woke up, I was back in my apartment. Everything looked normal. No photos, no figure, no scratches. But I know it wasn't a dream. I know because now, when I look through my peephole, I can see inside apartment 302. I see myself, standing there, watching, and I haven't moved in days. I stopped using the peephole after that, taped over it with 3 layers of duct tape, pushed a dresser in front of the door just in case, and shoved my couch against the front windows. Something wasn't right in this building. Specifically, something wasn't right with apartment 302. But no one would talk to me about it. Not the landlord, not the neighbors. I started knocking on doors, trying to find someone, anyone who'd give me something. Most didn't answer. A few peeked out through their chains or cracked their doors an inch, enough to tell me, leave it alone, or you're better off not knowing. It was as if everyone on this floor knew something terrible and had chosen to live with it rather than confront it. And the more I tried to understand what was happening, the more the building started to change. Lights flickering, my plumbing gurgling in the middle of the night with what sounded like whispered words I couldn't quite make out. Doors creaking open when I was sure I'd locked them. The air itself started feeling heavy, like I was constantly being watched. That pressure behind your eyes when someone's staring at you from behind. Except it never stopped. I started documenting everything. Photos, recordings. I set up a camera facing my front door, pointing directly at the sealed peephole. I let it run for 8 hours while I tried to sleep in the kitchen. When I checked the footage the next day, I expected to see nothing. Just my closed door. But around 3:17 a.m., the tape glitched. Brief static, and then the video resumed. But this time, the view had changed. The camera was now inside apartment 302. No cuts, no edits, just inside. It showed the same hallway from the inside of that cursed unit, with my front door at the end. The shot remained perfectly still for 3 minutes. Then, without warning, the camera shifted slightly, turned, panned left, revealing a wall covered in photos, dozens of them. All of me, my face at different angles, sleeping, working, eating, my expressions blank, unaware. Then the camera turned to a figure, tall, skin pale like wax, limbs just slightly too long, head tilted unnaturally. And those same wide, unblinking eyes. It raised one hand, long, claw-like fingers curling, and placed it gently on the lens. The video cut out. I tried to go to the police, told them everything, showed them the tape. But by the time I got there, the file had been corrupted. Nothing but static. They said it was probably a prank, or a mental breakdown, maybe a neighbor messing with me. But I knew what I saw, and I could feel it now, every night. That thing, whatever it was, it had its eyes on me. Sometimes I'd wake up to the sound of someone breathing right beside my bed. Other times I'd come home to find things moved, just slightly. The salt shaker turned. My toothbrush damp when I hadn't used it. The whispers grew more coherent, too. In the beginning, it was just sounds, a murmur like water in the pipes. But soon, I could make out phrases. He sees you, behind the walls. Soon. It was as if the apartment was no longer just a space. It was a mouth, whispering threats through every vent, every outlet, every crack in the plaster. I decided to leave. I had to. I packed everything in a single suitcase, left behind the furniture, the books, everything. Just the essentials. I didn't even care about my deposit. But as I reached the door, as I pulled the tape off the peephole one final time, I looked. I shouldn't have. But I looked, and what I saw didn't make sense. I was looking into my own apartment in the exact same layout, same lighting, same hallway, but instead of the front door across from me, there was another me, staring, eyes wide and hollow, expression slack. My reflection blinked, something I hadn't done, and then smiled. That smile didn't reach the eyes. It was twisted, broken, and behind it, just over its shoulder, I saw the figure again, tall, watching. Then the peephole went black. I didn't even realize I'd dropped my suitcase until I heard it hit the floor. I turned the knob, but the door wouldn't budge. Same as before, like it was bolted shut from the outside. I ran to the window, sealed. The glass wouldn't break, no matter what I threw at it. And then came the knock. 3 soft taps. I didn't answer. I didn't breathe. I just waited. Another knock, then a slide. Paper shoved under the door. Another photo. My apartment, taken from the ceiling this time, with me in the center, mouth open mid-scream, like I was being pulled apart from the inside. And scribbled at the bottom, in black ink that looked wet even as I touched it. Room for one more. The lights flickered and died. I don't remember falling asleep, but I must have. Because I woke up on the floor hours later. Doors still shut, windows still sealed. But the photo was gone. The camera too. All the proof erased. I don't know how long I'll last here. I don't know what it wants. But every night, the eyes return, watching me, waiting for something. Maybe for me to stop fighting. Maybe to take my place. Or maybe I already have. Because sometimes, when I look in the mirror, I don't recognize what's looking back. The forest that calls your name. I was warned not to go into the woods behind my grandfather's house. Everyone in that small town knew the stories. They called it Black Hollow Forest, and even saying the name out loud seemed to make the room colder. Kids were told it was haunted, that people disappeared there or came back. Wrong. My grandfather never talked much about it, except to say, "You hear it call you, you run the other way. Doesn't matter who it sounds like, it ain't them." I thought it was just one of those small-town legends. But I was wrong. So very, very wrong. It started with a voice. I'd gone to stay with my grandfather after my mother passed. He was the last family I had, and though I didn't know him well, he'd welcomed me without question. His place was surrounded by thick pine trees, the forest pressing right up to the edge of the backyard. At night, the trees looked like a wall, dark and unmoving. But sometimes, just sometimes, you'd think you saw something shifting between them. Not an animal, not a person, just movement. But it was the voice that got me. The first time I heard it, I was brushing my teeth before bed. The bathroom window faced the forest, and through the glass, I heard her. My mother. "Eli," she said softly, just like she used to when waking me up for school. "Eli, baby, come out here." I froze. The toothbrush fell from my mouth and hit the sink. My heart was pounding. I knew it couldn't be her. But the voice, it was perfect, gentle, familiar, filled with that same warmth I hadn't heard in weeks. "It's okay," she said, as if she knew I was doubting. "I'm here. I'm back. Just come to me." I ran downstairs and told my grandfather. He didn't ask questions, just turned pale and walked over to a locked cabinet. He pulled out an old hunting rifle and said, "You didn't answer it, did you?" I shook my head. "Good," he said. "That's not your mother. That thing out there, it can sound like anyone. It picks at your grief, your guilt. It wants to lure you in." He didn't sleep that night. Sat by the back door with that rifle across his lap, muttering prayers I didn't recognize. I didn't sleep either, because I kept hearing it. First, my mother again, then my father, dead for years, telling me he missed me. Then my childhood dog, barking excitedly. Every voice from my past, begging me to step outside. I plugged my ears, tried everything. But the voices always found their way in, whispering through the vents, the walls, the floorboards. I knew it couldn't be real, but it felt real. It felt like they were just a few feet away, just beyond the tree line. The next morning, I found footprints in the backyard. Bare feet, human. But the stride was all wrong. Too long, too uneven. They started at the forest's edge and went right up to the house. Stopped just beneath my bedroom window. My grandfather saw them and swore. "It's close now," he said. "Close and getting bold. If it can't trick you into coming out, it'll find a way in." He handed me a small pouch filled with what he called grave dirt and iron shavings. "Keep this with you. Do not open the windows. Do not leave after dark. And no matter what you hear, do not speak back." But that night, I slipped up. I'd been dreaming of her again, my mother. In the dream, she was sitting on the porch, smiling. And when I woke up, I could still hear her humming the lullaby she used to sing to me when I was little. It was coming from right outside the front door. I didn't go out, but I did speak. Just one word. "Mom." The second I said it, the humming stopped. Silence, cold and absolute. Then I heard it, scratching on the front door, slow and deliberate, something dragging sharp nails or claws down the wood. My grandfather burst into the hallway with the rifle, eyes wild. "You spoke," he said. "God help us." He pushed me into the bathroom and told me to stay there. Said it wouldn't come in for me, not yet, but it might try to take him. I heard the door crash open. The wind howled through the house, and with it came the voices, all of them, screaming and whispering and laughing. I covered my ears and rocked on the floor, waiting for it to end. Hours passed, maybe longer. Eventually, the noise stopped. When I came out, the house was silent. The front door was wide open, and my grandfather was gone. The only thing left was the pouch he gave me, now torn and empty on the floor. After my grandfather disappeared, I was left alone in a house that no longer felt like a home. The forest pressed in on every side, closer now, like the trees themselves had moved in during the night. The air inside the house had gone still, heavy with something I couldn't name. And the silence was louder than any scream. For days, I didn't leave. I didn't speak. I didn't sleep. I just waited. For a knock, a whisper, a shadow in the window. But nothing came. The forest was patient. It didn't need to rush. It had all the time in the world. I considered leaving. I packed a bag more than once, standing at the front door with my hand on the knob. But I couldn't bring myself to open it, because I knew what was out there. Or rather, I didn't. And that was worse. One night, I found myself drawn to my grandfather's study, the place he always kept locked, the one room he never let me enter. But now, the door was slightly ajar, as if inviting me in. Inside was a mess of old books, dusty shelves, yellowed newspaper clippings, and journals stacked high in piles. It looked like he'd been studying the forest for years, decades maybe, trying to understand it, fight it, protect others from it. But above all else, there was one thing he had made very clear in every page I read. The forest is not alive. It is aware. According to one of his notebooks, the entity that haunted Black Hollow wasn't a ghost or a demon. It wasn't a single being. It was the land itself. The trees, the wind, the soil. It all worked together, feeding off memories, drawing strength from sorrow. It didn't just copy the voices of the dead, it created them from your own mind, plucking memories like fruit from a tree. The more pain you carried, the louder it could speak. The more guilt, the deeper it could reach. It wasn't after bodies. It was after identity. It wanted to become you by breaking you down, piece by piece, until you willingly gave yourself up. I read a journal entry that froze the blood in my veins. It doesn't always kill. Sometimes it keeps them. People who've gone missing, sometimes you hear them again years later, voices fresh as ever, unchanged. It traps them, or traps pieces of them, like echoes. But not all are victims. Some become part of it willingly. Those are the worst of all, the ones who gave in. I began to notice the changes around the house. Mirrors started warping, showing not my reflection, but versions of me I didn't recognize. At night, I would hear breathing from behind the walls. My phone stopped working. No calls went through. Even when I tried to drive out, the road would twist, leading me right back to the driveway no matter which direction I turned. I was stuck. And then, one night, I saw him, my grandfather, standing at the edge of the tree line, just as the sun dipped beneath the horizon. He didn't wave, didn't speak, just watched. I ran outside, ignoring every rule, calling out to him, begging for him to come back. But he only turned and walked into the trees. I chased after him, deep into the dark where the moonlight couldn't reach. The forest welcomed me. It felt like walking into a dream or a trap. The air grew colder with every step. The trees grew taller, their trunks impossibly wide. And the whispers began again. But this time, they didn't sound like my family. They sounded like me. Dozens of voices, all mine, crying, laughing, pleading. You left me. You let me die. You never said goodbye. I spun in circles, clutching my ears, trying to block it out, but they were inside my head now. Then I saw the clearing, a perfect circle of bare earth surrounded by towering trees. In the center stood a tree unlike the others. Black bark, branches that twisted like broken fingers, and from it hung small objects. Trinkets, shoes, hair ribbons, teeth. And there, nailed to the trunk, was the final horror. Faces. Human faces, stretched and dried like leather, stitched at the edges to the bark. And among them, I saw him, my grandfather, his eyes still open, still watching, still alive in some terrible, incomplete way. I turned and ran. The forest shifted, trying to block my path, the ground rising up, roots lashing at my feet. But something, maybe the last piece of my grandfather that still remained, opened a path just wide enough to squeeze through. I stumbled back to the house just before dawn. The doors slammed behind me. And for the first time in weeks, the voices stopped. The house felt empty again. Or maybe the forest had finally gotten what it wanted, a part of me broken off and left behind. I moved out the next day. Never told anyone the full story. Just sold the house, packed my things, and left the town behind. but I hear it sometimes. At night, in cities far from the forest, when I'm alone and everything is quiet. A soft voice calling my name, my own voice, asking me to come home.